And hi, everyone, and welcome to another collective Hotelier Polls live session here at Tech Talk Travel. Thank you so much for taking the time and tuning in with us and joining us here. And my name is Leah Jordan. I'm co-founder of Tech Talk Travel. It's my honor to host this session today. If you feel this session might be interesting to your wider network, just make sure to share it now and also say hi in the comment section so we know where you're tuning in from, and also add your questions and comments later on. But before I continue, please meet my fantastic co-host, Pedro Colaco, CEO
Hi.
at Guest-Centric and Great Hotels of the World. Pedro, hi, great to see you. How are you?
Good to see you. Very good, very good.
Yeah, are you ready for another round?
I'm always ready.
I'm always ready. Yeah, that's what I love about you and our collaboration. So for everyone who's joining us for the first time, Guest-Centric started very early on in the pandemic to collect on a monthly basis data from their customers and hoteliers from certain markets, and they publish each month the Hotelier Polls report. And that's what we're discussing here today. Pedro will shortly introduce a few of the highlights, and then we will see what implications there are for the respective markets. And each session, we also have a guest panelist joining, usually a hotelier sharing his or her perspectives from the respective market and discussing with us. And today, we're very delighted to have tuning in from the UK, Ben Thomas, Chief Commercial Officer at Penta Hotels. Hi, Ben.
Hey, how are you?
Thank you. We're good. It's amazing to have you joining. Thank you for taking the time.
No, great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, and for the audience, I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with Penta Hotels. You're a group headquartered in Frankfurt, right, in Germany, and currently there are 27 operating hotels under the brand in Europe and Asia, correct?
Yes, correct.
Perfect. So that's a great group size to look at when we look at the data, and also for the audience to give you some context on Pedro, because I think that's always helpful to see like who's actually taking care of this report and who are we working with here. So Guest-Centric is a leading provider of cloud-based digital marketing software and services, right, Pedro? So
yes, we are.
Yes. Yeah, and it's fun to work with them. I can vouch for that. And then Great Hotels of the World, who we're working with a lot as well, is a leading representation company for independent upscale and luxury hotels. And if I'm correct, currently you have an exclusive portfolio of 60 hotels and resorts worldwide.
Yeah, give or take.
Yeah, that's great. So you know who you're dealing with here. My name is Leah Jordan, as I said before. And this is a data-based session, right? So we will share some insights from the report. We also share the download link with you in the comment section. So watch out for that. Knock yourselves out. It's a great document with a lot of insights and great stats, and also an interesting interview with our last guest, David Chesler. So well worth the read. Have a look. And we also encourage any hotelier joining us today to have a look at the survey link for the next coming report to add your data and insights too, because Pedro, right, the more the better. And
absolutely. So I think in these uncertain times, I think one of the important things is to share information among fellow hoteliers, and so we encourage everybody to really participate in the report so that we get better quality data, right? The more people answer, the better the quality of the data.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and now I'm really curious to see how the findings are actually reflecting and what Ben also has to say about these findings, and if you can agree with them or if you disagree, so if you can add to insights. Is always very interesting to see. And to start off, I mean, the main aspect that kept with me when I looked at the report was that it's the first time in May 2021 now, in the 15th edition. I mean, you're doing this for the 15th time, right? This data. It's the first time that bookings actually exceeded 2019 values since April 2020. And now you could say, let's be optimistic. That's amazing. Let's go ahead. We're on a road to recovery. Is it a reason to be optimistic? What would you say, Pedro, based on the findings?
I would say that, I tend to be always on the optimistic side, but I would say that May was an amazing month overall for the industry, because we saw a huge pickup in bookings, mostly on the direct channel and on Booking.com. Booking.com has really turned the marketing machine up to try and generate demand and drum up reservations for our hotels. We are also seeing the other channels pick up, like Expedia, some of the larger consolidators, but at a much slower pace. Even the GDS is picking up a little bit. But I would say that at least from a bookings perspective, May was an amazing month. And I think it started extremely well. It ended up on not such a good note because some of these ups and downs, opens and closes, the quarantine, the amber, the green list is creating a lot of uncertainty. So we haven't seen the flux of, cancellations that we saw in 2020 when the pandemic started, but we are seeing a significant amount of rebookings. Still, I think if you look back to May, I want to show you another graph, which is a little bit further down, which is, hold on, let me just show you. I think optimism is setting in, right? More hotels are open. If you look there at the red line, which are the percentage of hotels that are completely shut down, we're below 20% now. Which, at least from our survey, right, which really is an indication that optimism is setting in. I do believe that, June has brought a little bit of realism, right? There were also quite a few bank holidays at the tail end of May and beginning of June. Those are now over. So I think most hotels are in a waiting pattern for the summer break, i.e. July and August in Europe. Now, this is really a tale of two worlds, because let me see if I can find, here we are, right? The US is in a completely different, so this is what's happening in Europe, but the US has been, consistently with very, very large amounts of bookings since March of this year. So I think that there's a much more robust attitude towards optimism and recovery in the US than in Europe. So I think in Europe, it depends on which week we talk to our customers, that they may be optimists or they may be pessimists. And I think it's a little bit of a seesaw right now. On the US, we are seeing consistent growth, and that's also driving very high ADRs in leisure destinations, for instance, like Miami Beach.
All right. And Ben, what would you say? Can you echo what Pedro just shared, or is there some differences from your perspective that you saw in the past weeks and looking forward as well for the demand?
I think for May, we saw it gradually kind of increasing from April onwards. So we started to see business starting to come back to levels that we hadn't seen. And actually for June, with the good kind of last few days now of the month, June will be our highest revenue month since February of 2020. So kind of pre-pandemic times, that was our last trading month. So we're looking at June being probably the strongest month for us. And we can already see pace of bookings for July, August already exceeding kind of each previous month. So there's a definite upturn coming up. I think, as you mentioned, I think May was heavily impacted by the holiday period. So we saw, huge upturns over the holiday periods, but still those midweek kind of business travel days are still lagging behind where we would probably like them to be.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned that, right, Pedro, that you, in our pre-conversation, that you feel some lack in confidence now when you're talking to hoteliers. Would you pick on that?
Yeah, I think one of the questions we asked to our hotelier members that answered the survey was, what's their confidence in the vaccination progress across the world? And I think this is also reflective of the confidence in the business overall, right? And I think that there's almost like a direct correlation between confidence in the vaccination progress and confidence in business reopening, right? And we can see here that North America is far above everybody else in the world, and then Europe. And interestingly, I thought Africa is quite confident, almost as much confident as Europe. Which is sort of interesting, and for me, it points out that actually Europeans are a little bit too pessimistic about what's happening with vaccination, right? We're much further ahead than Africa in terms of vaccination. Still, there's not that business confidence setting in because, again, we're seeing this open, close, lockdown, partial lockdowns in certain cities, restaurants open and until 11, and then they have to go back to 6 p.m. And there's this has just created a lot of the uncertainty in our industry, and I think that's sort of corroding the confidence in the future. But I do believe that vaccination is going well in Europe. I do believe that confidence is going to set in, and I think we're going to have a good summer, and hopefully September we're going to be sort of back to normal. It's never going to be back to normal, but sort of back to normal.
September, you're saying, Ben, would you agree with that? Is that where we're back?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what we see. We see through the summer months, obviously, the continuation of leisure travel. But I think, as you mentioned, as the vaccination programs really ramp up and kind of hit the levels that they need to, then I think that we start to see business travel return. And I think that what's critical to that, I think one of the questions that you kind of cover is that the transatlantic corridor reopening. And as soon as that then starts to reopen, then I think that underpins business travel, because business travel will start once again. And that's really what we need to have it. I think it's great for our hotels to have the leisure business, and that will see us through the summer months. But really what we always need is that underpinning of kind of business travel, which then allows us to take group bookings, and conference and events start to return again. And that's when you start to see the economy as a whole kind of coming through again.
Yes,
yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Certainty, right, on the side of the corporates and business travel. That's interesting, right, Pedro? Because when I recall correctly from the report, there is a finding that the hoteliers decrease their offers, like efforts around offers for local markets, like domestic markets, and now they're really looking at upskilling the workforce.
Yeah.
What's your interpretation?
So I'll go back. I'll find that in the report here in 1 second. I wanted to add one more thing, which is I remember being here a while back, probably somewhere in September, October, and we were saying, the U.S. has to get its act together. Until the U.S. gets its act together, this is never going to return to normal, because they're so important as a source market for business travel, but also leisure travel. And I think they've sort of got their act together one way or the other, right? And now it's really for Europe to pick up steam and catch up, honestly. So it's sort of interesting how also the center of the crisis has moved, right? It went to the US. Now I think it's back in Europe, and I think it's also Americans are more risk takers than Europeans in general, right? And certainly the government. And I think the government over there is making, sure that people feel safe and go out and spend money. And I think the European governments have to do the same, right? We have to build consumer confidence, or we won't go back. But going back to your point here, I brought the slide up now, which is, we can see here across the last year or so, hotel priorities, and obviously cleaning programs were very important for a while, and what we're seeing is that this light blue line is shape offers around the local market, and that has fallen to an all-time low. And I believe it was because in May people were very confident that there was going to be significant international travel going on, right? And when you hear that Ryanair is putting so many, planes up, and EasyJet and so on, and they were doing sort of point-to-point routes that people weren't expecting, people were very confident that international travel is going to come back, strong. My expectation is that in the next edition, local shaping local offers is going to be more important again. I don't know. That's my perception.
Ben, how does it reflect in your commercial strategies with your teams? Do you see the same?
Yeah, I think in the short term, we still remain focused on local and kind of internal travel, as we would call it, within country borders and where it's allowed. But I think, we start to see that change. The one thing that I thought was relevant in the report to me is that the kind of upskilling the workforce and re-engaging the workforce, and how important that is for us at this moment in time, because the industry has a shortage of skilled employees, and people that did retain their roles through the pandemic then are now under more pressure than they ever were before, because there's less people. And of course, as you start to see the leisure traveller staying with this longer length of stay, so perhaps in some cases more demanding to cater for, because if I search for a hotel in most major European cities, I have the choice of any hotel. You see occupancy levels which are recovering, but still at lower levels than they ever were before. So the consumer really has the power to choose which hotel they would like to stay at. And of course, that then puts an incredible pressure on the guest experience and the service delivery from pre-booking stage as well. Are we as good as we need to be from a digital and e-commerce point of view? And do we appear in the right search areas? And then what's that booking experience like for the consumer? And then once the guest does arrive, actually, is everything as good as it can be? Because as we say now, there's so much choice available. The consumer can just vote straight away, and they can just go to any hotel that they potentially never could before, because the pricing has changed. And I look at our markets and we see 5-star hotels now in the 4-star bracket and so on and so forth in terms of their pricing. So everyone's kind of after the same new customers. So we add additional pressure to the workforce, and now starting to try and make sure we have the systems in place for them to be able to deliver the service that's required.
Oh, it sounds challenging though, right? Like,
yeah, and I think what Ben is saying is spot on, right? Because what we've seen here, right, to look at domestic versus international, which is the point that I think Ben was making, is, we've seen a huge switch from most of our hotels that we have in our CRS relying very heavily on international travel, right? 2/3 or more of their travelers are international. Through the pandemic, actually, that switched away, and it almost became 2/3 local, 1/3 international. In May, we saw a lot of bookings from international, but still the stays are a lot domestic, right? So I think we're seeing future on the books travel from international travelers, but still the sort of, we know that on the books today doesn't mean much, right? Unfortunately, right? It gives us a warm and fuzzy feeling that the future is better, but unfortunately, because of the issue of travel restrictions, on the books is just what it means. It's on the books. It's not a real reservation until people have actually checked out, and therefore I do think that there's, if you want to capture some short-term revenue, you got to focus on the local markets. But obviously, if you look at further out, and we're getting further out as we're talking, international is going to be critical for especially city center and resorts to recover, right? I think city center, but city center has been doing actually quite good. I was quite surprised looking over the last 3 or 4 weeks that we're seeing some primary and some secondary destinations doing very well in city center, actually a little bit better than I was expecting, because I would expect that most people wouldn't travel to city center, but also a lot of young people are traveling. That's the other sort of interesting data point that's not in the report, but that we can see is that a lot of the guests are really young people that are really not worried about the pandemic any longer, right? And they just want to get out, and therefore what's important is that these city center destinations have actually dining options and stuff to do.
Yeah, we've talked about this a lot before in many other sessions, right? But there's a change probably in the consumer profile. The guest that you used to know is not the same anymore. Ben, how are you prepping your team to actually leverage that and to make the best out of? I mean, you have to find the customer now, right? You said before, they actually are on the longer side of the decision, right? You can have any hotel. So how do you position yourself and how do you find them?
So yeah, we took the opportunity during the pandemic really to think about who we are as a brand, and are we fit for purpose post-pandemic? Because pre-pandemic, of course, we had a clear marketing strategy and everything was there, but we spent now the last 8 months really saying, okay, well, once the recovery starts to happen, where are we kind of targeting the right customer? Is there a new customer that we need to now go after? And we identified this quite early on in terms of the digital side of the guest. And as you see the average age of travel is reducing, then I thought it was also interesting, the report, to look at the now primary use of technology in terms of booking, particularly on mobile platforms. So we soon identified that actually we needed to invest quite heavily on a mobile first website. We go live, hopefully, fingers crossed, next Friday with a new mobile first website, which has all been around based around what we could see would be happening, the kind of short lead time. Particularly, we took a lead time from 28 days down to 5 in the space of 8 months. So we really started to look at, and then where were people searching for us? Are we featuring in the right place? So before we even get to the booking stage, checking at that funnel at the top to make sure that we're actually identifying as many travelers as we can, and then to look at how we communicate. So we changed our style of communication also with a younger audience in mind, and started to focus more on experience-led packages, and also the use of music as well. And people now starting to kind of miss live entertainment and live music. So what could we do to kind of bridge the gap in the meantime?
And what did you do? Is there something you can share, like a good example?
Yeah, so we had some kind of live streaming of concerts that took place within our lounges where we were able to, and then stream that out digitally. We've created our own playlist using a music partner, which we're now starting to share, and also kind of changed our method of communication into more blog-driven, kind of aspirational thought process and target audiences. So we're not just going out to market and say, here's a cheap deal because we know everyone's also looking for price. We started to tell more stories about the destinations that we were in and reasons to why somebody would visit. Because for me, I would always take vacations abroad when all of a sudden I can't. So now I need to look at destinations that I've never thought of before. And part of that journey is also to tell a story to potentially your own local audience that have never really thought about staying in their local area or taking a vacation that's less than 1 or 2 hours away from their home destination.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Pedro, do you see the same with your customers?
Absolutely. And I mean, as Ben was speaking, I just brought up the slide, which really shows, the huge explosion of mobile bookings. And I do believe that this is for 2 reasons. One is there's a whole younger crowd that is making some short-term decisions. And if you're booking, 1 or 2 nights, you really don't need to do a lot of research. If the place is right, if the price is right, and if you feel confident, you're just going to book, right? You're going to do a lot less shopping around, to be very honest, other than if you're, if it's something that you've been planning for a while. But what we're seeing is that, as Ben was saying, that the booking windows are shortening, which means people are becoming more, how can I say this, emotional about their travel. And therefore, they're going to book quickly if they see the right offer at the right time. And one of the things that we think is important and is going to continue to be important is to have sort of, more activity around the website, more ways of reinforcing confidence. We're also seeing that people are interacting more with hotels in terms of, calling. Often after the booking, they will call and say, hey, tell me, what can I do? What can I do? So planning in advance, because everybody's, now in this new reality that you don't know much, even though you may know the destination very well, you don't know much about what's going on right now. So I think that, as Ben was pointing out, to some extent, it's sort of a very difficult situation for hotels because the consumers are, to some extent, more demanding because they have to be, right? And on the other hand, hotels have less staff, and the staff that they have is probably less trained. So I think, 1, we need to look at automation, but 2, we also need to be in constant communication with our frontline people to make sure that they deliver a good experience, right? And maybe, just sorry to interrupt you, and maybe reduce some services, right? I won't mention the brand, but I was at a very high-end 5-star brand lately, and they did not have 24-hour room service. Right. At midnight, there were no more food options, right? So this is also a reflection that they can't really keep the service level up, so they've downgraded. So maybe that's something that we need to do. We just need to set the right expectation with consumers. And
your interpretation is they did that due to the leaner teams they're having to deal with?
Exactly. That's my interpretation. A, less occupancy. B, and less occupancy means leaner teams. So we're going to reduce service. We're going to communicate it well and say, hey, look, if you want to have something to eat, please do make sure that you get, something and the order in by midnight, and that's it, right? So if you communicate it, I think consumers are willing to take service cuts because they understand that we're in a not normal situation right now, right? As long as you communicate it well, and I think that's the critical item here.
Yeah, Ben, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think it's really relevant. I think we're in such a challenging situation where you're stuck between, okay, we need to make a saving in the bottom line. Obviously, occupancies are still lower than they need to be. And my background was operational, so I see it from both sides, really. But from a commercial side, I also say, well, until we do decide to reopen fully, how do we truly attract the customer? And if you're giving a customer what they think is that there's such a pent-up demand for travel and everybody's really excited to go and travel again, unless their experience is perfect, then they're unlikely to return back. So you have to try and make sure, for us, we look at how we can try and make sure that guest journey is as good as possible. And we found success where we couldn't offer, to pick on the example of the 24-hour room service, we started to look at how else could we deliver that. So we start to partner with Uber Eats and Deliveroo. So if we can't provide the food service, at least that consumer will. They will still get the same sort of food service. And then actually we found it to be incredibly successful for us, where, as we all know, probably room service isn't the most efficient or cost efficient kind of way for our consumers. So actually, why don't we just take a percentage of margin from Uber Eats or Deliveroo, give the consumer a great restaurant experience, but still within the confines of our business. So it's kind of looking at trying to think of ways differently. So you still give the guest that experience. We still manage to maintain the payroll cost and reduce that where we need to. But making sure you offer a service that's relevant.
No, that's a great practice. Yeah, absolutely. But probably more so for like city center hotels, of course, right? I don't think on the destinations you get like a Uber Eats.
Not everywhere is available. Not everywhere is available, but where we can, for sure, then we would always seek to. And I think it's important that you have kind of different ways of looking at how you can deliver, or can you provide. We also went into partnership with a company that were specialists in airline food, but high quality airline food, to say, okay, well, where we didn't have our kitchens open, what could we also deliver to the guests from a food and beverage point of view, which would still be of good enough quality, but still with limited availability of people.
Yeah, sounds good. Listen, there's a question from the audience. We have Michael Tarrant joining us. Hi, Michael. Thank you for tuning in and being with us here in this session. And I just read it out, and then I opened the floor to it. So Michael is saying, when it comes to Europe and the UK, taking into account the continual changes to restrictions on travel and the traffic light systems for safe destinations, etc., how can hotels craft a viable marketing strategy that both invites international travelers that we talked about and conveys a sense of confidence that their travel plans will not be hindered by COVID restrictions, requirements, etc.? It's a holistic question, so I'm looking forward to your replies. Ben, how about you start?
Sure. I think that the one part that still remains critical is total flexibility and total kind of ease of cancellation and freedom of movement, really. I think that's the critical part. I don't think we're at a stage where we can go back to advanced purchase and prepaid rates, which are non-refundable, non-transferable. So I think the first thing you have to make sure is that do you have a policy which allows flexible movement, and also we extend that into smaller groups and meetings and events as well. So for us, it's something that we looked at to say, actually, how could we, there's less of a risk now. If we think our hotels will run at occupancy levels of between 50 and 75% for the foreseeable, historically on those peak nights, you would always say, well, I need to protect those, so therefore I need to levy high cancellation charges. But now if that group of, say, 50 rooms drops down to 30, yes, you have some short-term displacement, but actually you're not really displacing high amounts of revenue. So for us, it's trying to make it as flexible as possible to build the confidence of consumer as well in terms of your safety offering and your approach to cleanliness. But I think, as the report said, I think that's now kind of falling behind slightly, and people are now kind of done with the whole kind of total COVID safe. You now have to look at ways that you can now protect the consumer, but provide them with that same great experience. So I think flexibility is key, and I think that will be for some time, because I think as we briefly spoke before, I think I'm stacked up with a number of flights that I have where I have vouchers and credits to use, and I will use them at some stage. And I actively would seek to book a vacation now if I saw a good deal available, providing I could rebook, providing I had that total flexibility to change if I needed to.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, that's understandable, right? But it also carries like a risk, like an entrepreneurial risk for the hotelier side. I mean, it's difficult to manage and forecast by that. Pedro?
No cash flow, for sure.
So obviously, we are seeing hotels getting more interested in international travel. And what we're seeing is, for instance, with the UK restrictions, even if you're on the amber list, the amount of PCR tests that you have to do, before you fly on the destination, before you fly back, then so I think that I would expect governments to become a little bit more flexible in terms of making sure that you don't need to have an expensive PCR test, and you can do a 25 quid or a 25 euro antigen test, that would be, available. Like, for instance, if you want to travel to the US, all you need is an antigen test, right? So you don't need a full PCR test at 150 quid or whatever, right? So I think that part of the problem is consumers are, adding all these costs up, right? And if you do all this stuff, and then you have to fly back home, like we had in May, people flying back home because the government changes things overnight, doesn't give people enough time to come back, and all this stuff, right? So this is creating, I think, a serious barrier. So what I would say is, from a hotelier perspective, we got to think through the consumer's eyes and think of solutions. And I know a lot of hotels that have partnered with labs, and they have, people coming to the hotel once or twice a week for an hour or 2 hours, and people can do the tests right at the hotel, so they don't have to find out where can I get my test done, right? And they could put it on their hotel bill. And so there's things that we can, in this new travel experience, that hotels can do to try and to minimize the pain that consumers have to go through to stay at hotels. These are just some examples of things that we've seen hoteliers do, but I'm sure that that more will come. But honestly, my hope is that governments are going to become a little bit more flexible. I mean, this PCR test requirement is especially in the UK, is just going absolutely nuts, where you have to do one before you come, one before you go, and then two when you land. I mean, that alone could be easily 600 euros or 600 pounds.
And I mean,
which is a lot more than an airline ticket.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the bucket size for one family member for some families, right? For a vacation, so you consider twice if you do that.
Yeah.
Ben, is there any properties from Penta where you offer testing on location to ease the situation for the customers?
Yeah, our hotel in Leipzig in Germany has a testing center built in. I think it's as you said there, Pedro. I think as governments then start to become, or as countries start to become more vaccinated, and the vaccination levels rise, and we have for the countries that have double vaccinations, then once you reach that kind of level of safety of there, then I really strongly hope and believe that there will be then, these things will start to loosen. And yes, well, maybe we'll go to the antigen test, because I think the critical part for me, what we try to preach to our team and say to them is, as horrible as this disease and illness is, it's not going to go away in the short term. It's going to be here for 2, 3, 4 or 5 years. We're not going to eradicate it. So we have to start to kind of look at ways that we can cope with it, and how we can allow freedom of movement once again. We just have to now start to look at ways of how we can overcome those restrictions, because until we have those lifted, or freedom of movement, then business travel can't return, and we need business travel to return, because the leisure customer will only give us a certain amount of volume on certain days of the week, and that business movement has to happen to allow the whole economy to move again for us.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I mean, and all these efforts with the passport and all this stuff, it's going to be critical, right? Because as Ben is saying, no company, large company, right? The people that really drive business travel are the large companies, right? Obviously, all the smaller startup companies and so on, they will travel if they need to, right? Because there's not so much duty of care as there is, an aggressiveness to go after business. But if you think about the big companies in the world, this duty of care thing is really important. And if they don't have all the T's, crossed and all the I's dotted, they're not going to put people on planes. And I got a slide here, which is one of the questions that we ask people, which is, when do people expect business travel to return, right? And, if you look at this truly, is that people expect it to return in the second quarter of 2022, right? Really be back. And that means we still have almost a year ahead of, limited business travel. We are seeing on the great hotel side that people are, tentatively booking events and groups for the end of 2021 and the first and second quarter of 2022, but it's still tentative, right? We saw just last week, I think, Confex was supposed to have happened in London, and with 1 week advance notice, they moved it to September, right? So there's still a lot of uncertainty in the market, and I think we're going to have to navigate these waters and just be resilient, right? I always say, travel is going to come back, right? People will want to travel, and we've seen so much pent up demand, right? And I think it shows, right? People want to travel. We have the example of the US, which is sort of the path that we should, ambition for Europe at this stage. And travel is going to come back. Question is when, and we have to make sure as hoteliers that we're obviously responsible and are not incentivizing the spread of the disease. But I also think that the numbers we're looking at are the wrong numbers, right? If we continue to look at, as Ben was saying, the virus is going to be here for a very long time, right? So if we're going to look at people that are infected, that's going to be the wrong number. We got to look at, how many people are really getting sick and how many people are getting seriously sick because as we learn how to, with a vaccine and so on, where people can get infected, but they're not going to get seriously sick, then maybe it's just like we have to live with this, right? And we can't just stay home for 3 years or 4 years.
Yeah. Right. And was there any other point, Pedro, where you said that was very surprising to you when you saw the results from this 15th edition of the report?
No, not really. Because it's quite curious, right? I think as bookings come in, optimism sets in. As bookings slow down or cancellations come in, pessimism sets in. I think the one thing that I do believe, and it's more not from the report, but from interacting with people in general, is that there's this fatigue setting in, right? And people are just fed up with the situation. So there's going to be some people that are going to say, I'm going to travel no matter what. I really don't care. I'm not going to use a mask. I'm not going to do anything, right? So there's going to be these rebels somehow. And then there's other people that are going to say, I'm not going to do anything until everything is over. So I think that there's going to be, some...
Yeah, both extremes are not good, though. So.
Some extremes.
Helping.
Yeah. And we have to be resilient, right? And message accurately and say, hey, look, you can come safely. This is the situation. Yes, we have more cases, but, nobody's really dying from this stuff, right? We have to message better, I think.
Yeah. Absolutely. And looking at the hotels teams, Ben, I can imagine it's quite a challenge probably to keep motivation up and keep the teams engaged. And I mean, it's hard, right? If there's an uptick, then there's cancellations, then there's a change again. And, you work hard because what you described, it's not that you're not bored, right? You have enough to do right now. So how would you describe that? How do you approach this?
Yeah, I think you have to look really quite in detail over the kind of mental awareness and the mental health of your employees over these times as well, because I this morning had a conference with our sales team, and it's so challenging for them. If you think about the way a salesperson thinks, they've worked so hard to bring a client in historically, and they treat the client as their own. And all of a sudden, over the last 18 months, they've just seen everything they've worked for disintegrate almost overnight, and now they're having to trying to find new ways and new customers. It's really challenging for people, and I think you have to try and find ways to motivate as quick as possible and set small and manageable goals, and you really start to celebrate the smallest of wins, which I think is so important. Sometimes you forget that at our worst we were back at the lowest levels of revenue that you could ever imagine. And then you have to really, we're kind of celebrating the fact that we've achieved 15% occupancy in one of our hotels. But you have to, because otherwise you just end up in a downward spiral of negativity. And I think it's so important that you do kind of remain as upbeat as possible, because as you said, the industry will recover. This weekend just gone, I was in London on a leisure weekend, and it was the first time I've actually felt that the restaurants were full again and the bars were full again, and you could feel a sense of energy that people were kind of buzzing from this kind of feeling, and a lot like you see in the US, and the same type of way that people just have this desperation to have some form of normality again.
Yeah.
And what I thought was really interesting from my experience is it was the first kind of leisure break that we truly had for quite a while. And price becomes less of an issue. So in terms of, we went to a great restaurant for lunch and then a great restaurant for dinner. We went to a free cocktail bar, and it was only on the Sunday that I looked at my credit card statement and I'm like, wow,
we may have overdone this.
Yeah, Pedro, you should add a section to your report, because I can echo that from based on my conversations I have with hoteliers. They say the guests actually staying at the hotel, they triple the amount of money spending on site. Yeah, but unfortunately, I don't have any slide to show with data for that. It
I
shows
think you're so kind of wanting to go back to normal that that extra drink or that extra restaurant you go to that you wouldn't normally, and then you try and cram it all into a short period of time. So not only did I come back much poorer, I also came back quite a little bit heavier as well from
but also happier, I assume.
Absolutely.
But it probably has like very concrete implications on the digital guest journey, right? Because if you consider that, it's the more like imperative that you have a good process on site during the stay, upselling, etc., and automation that you mentioned before, Pedro. But yeah, like so. Yeah, I think although now there's like this resilience needed, and we still need to like work on being upbeat and looking positively in the future. There's still so much opportunity, right? To also take this and look at the current situation and just really test with the current customers how to really improve the entire journey. And that's what you shared as well, right, Ben? That you said that's what you looked at, the guest journey, and just to be even better than before, to make sure to not lose any of them.
Yeah, I think we were so far behind from a hospitality point of view, and still are from a digital tech point of view. And I can do my grocery shopping now and have it delivered within the next 2 hours to my home address. Then that's the norm now for people. And you look at the rise of Amazon and Uber being the classic examples, but it's because they have a great digital platform and digital service that can deliver. And hospitality has to now step up and also deliver that same digital journey that the guest now just assumes is the norm. It's no longer acceptable to have a lag or a waiting time on a booking window, because they'll just click off and go elsewhere. So we have to step up.
Yes, right. Listen, we're into 45 minutes now, so like soon. So maybe it's good time to wrap up. And something I took away is, of course, that flexibility is key. That there is an uptick in the bookings, and that we have to look for September. That there's the horizon. Is there any thoughts from like both of you? Like, what keeps you up at night right now? What's really keeping you up, looking at the months to come, where you think this is really vital? That's what we should not miss when setting up a good commercial strategy for hotels to navigate through the reopening phase and recovery.
For me, I think it was probably we saw this upturn at the same time last year. So we saw the rise of the summer bookings through the summer, and whilst we're ahead of last summer, we followed the same kind of upward turn. And then as we got into winter again with new restrictions, then we saw that gradually fall away again. So I guess that I believe business travel will start to come back, but kind of a nagging date I have in my mind is whether there's any restrictions in the winter. We just don't know what the winter will bring. So that would be my only thing that I have no hair left to lose, and I don't sleep very much anyway. So that would be my only two worries that I would have.
Right. Pedro, what about you?
I would almost echo it exactly, which is what I worry about is that, the governmental decision makers are so scared. They seem like they're running scared, honestly, and they're unwilling to try new things. And that's what scares me, right? Which is, okay, we're at the different vaccination level, but we're still using the same, indicators to think whether it's safe or not to travel. That just doesn't make any sense to me, especially in the UK, where we have a lot of people with the double with all both doses of the vaccine and so on and so forth. So what keeps me awake at night is that something happens somewhere in the world and everybody decides to lock down again, right? And I think this is what's precluding also the industry to make the investments, whether it's in contactless technology or automation or whatever, right? Because everybody's afraid that, if the government says nobody can travel for the next 6 months, then why did I spend all this money, putting this new tech in that's actually going to save me money in the long run? But in the meantime, it was an investment that I could have delayed for 6 months. And I think until we get that confidence back into the travel industry, and I do believe that if things get better in the summer and if September goes well, that we'll get that confidence back in. But as Ben was saying, if somebody in September decides that, it's not safe to travel to, some country, it becomes a bit of an issue.
Right. Yeah, I see.
But I do expect that, for instance, long range travel to Asia and Africa and so on is going to be, depressed for a very long time. Yeah. I think, business is not going to is not going to invest in destinations where people are not fully vaccinated.
Right. Yeah. There's another question, which is a perfect timing now. Again, from Michael Terry. Thank you again. And it's for you, Ben, as you can see probably on the screen too, right? And he asked, what is the most frequent guest concern that you receive when considering booking, and how do you, as you said, concerns? How do you?
So, yeah, the number one still remains to be what services and facilities are open. During my stay, will I have the experience that I expect to have? So is your restaurant open at full service, and so on and so forth? And we're now, as I said earlier, we're at that kind of critical tipping point of we have to almost spend our way back out of this by reopening as normal, by giving the guests everything they need to. And that will mean that in the short term, we make losses in terms of our restaurants will be empty at times, and we'll have downtimes, but we have to start to go back to a normal level of service. And so that's what we're trying to do now, where possible. We will try and reopen fully and provide all the services that we have to.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Well, I'd say we can wrap up, I guess. And for everyone in the audience who really wants to dig into this data again and read more detail, the report is there for a free download. It's a great read, and it will come up next month again, 16th edition. So for any hotelier, please add your day too, so we have even richer information next month. And let's see what changes until next month, or if it continues to develop in a way. And for everyone who tuned in, thank you so much for taking the time and being with us here. And Ben, we appreciate you took the time too to share your insights openly. I always admire if hoteliers share openly from their strategies and how everything is going with their teams, because I think that's just the best learning for all of us.
Absolutely.
But it's not without saying, so we appreciate that a lot. Thank you so much. And Pedro, it was a pleasure again. We're looking forward to the next session. And
yes, hopefully tanned.
We keep
more tanned, I should say.
Yeah. And if you go for if you go for a governmental role, let me know. I'll vote for you. So we.
Oh, no. Trust me, I wouldn't like to be in that situation. It's honestly, it's not easy, right? It's not easy, but I think there's got to be some common sense. You can't use metrics from a year ago to decide what to do now, I think.
Right. No, it's also about speed, right? And I mean, in any flexible speed, just be open to change and just don't stick with the old rules. And you don't lose your face just because you change something, what you said months ago, right? Yeah, if the circumstances demand that. Well, thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
All right, thank you very much, Lynn.
Have a great evening and afternoon and morning, whoever is tuning in from other countries. And see you soon. It's bye for now. And speak soon again.
Bye.
Thank you.